Hi guys, Josh here, aka Beards and Books, and today, if you can't tell already, I'm doing a review for And the Ocean Was Our Sky by Patrick Ness. Hope you enjoy. So guys, if you've been around my channel for a little while, you'll have heard me rave about Patrick Ness quite a few times. I did a review for A Monster Calls, which I will link above, and I'm also currently reading through the Chaos Walking trilogy, which I absolutely love. So I couldn't resist the chance to pick up the latest Patrick Ness book, which is also illustrated by Rowena Kai. I managed to pick up a really cool edition as well. This one's a signed edition by Patrick Ness himself, which is in Waterstones. So for those of you that haven't heard of the story, And the Ocean Was Our Sky is the latest book by Patrick Ness. This is a retelling of Moby Dick. Now, I personally haven't read Moby Dick, so I have probably missed a whole bunch of bits and points as to where it's similar and where it's linked, and whale versus man, all that good stuff. But I don't know. So if you're looking for that, I can't really help you. Sorry, guys. What I would do, as always, I will break this down into plus points and negatives. This is a book I enjoyed, but it's not one that I would necessarily rave about. So I will just let you know that first of all. So going into positives, it's a really quick read. It's a really interesting read. I personally really enjoy Patrick Ness's writing style. I think he's got a really pretty, a very descriptive writing style, which works very well, especially in something like this where it's an illustrated edition. It lends really well with the illustrations. I imagine it must have been quite easy for the illustrator to sort of plan the drawings for this, just purely because of Ness's writing style. You can kind of picture them yourself, even without the pictures being present. As I said, I haven't read Moby Dick, but speaking to people that have read Moby Dick and have read this, they do say that there are a lot of similarities between the stories. But if you didn't know, in this book, we follow the whales. Instead of following man hunting whales, we follow the whales hunting man, essentially, which is a really interesting twist. So as mentioned, we follow a pod of whales in And the Ocean Was Our Sky, and the main whale that we follow is a whale called Bathsheba, which is a great name for a whale, let's be honest. So we start off with Bathsheba, and she is kind of becoming a hunter, which is what they call the whales that hunt man. But she doesn't necessarily want to be a hunter. She doesn't agree with a lot of the reasons behind why they hunt men and such. So she's an interesting character. They can't make her too complex because the book is quite short, but she's interesting enough to make you want to carry on and read more. Now, as I mentioned, in this story, the whales hunt man. So it's interesting, but it's also slightly weird to read as a human, I suppose. There are parts where there are broken ships, and the whales are essentially gutting the ship, and they're kind of collecting the humans to sell our bones and remains and like trinkets and such. But I suppose the point of that is what humans do to whales. So it's just the flip reverse of the story. It was interesting to read. It was slightly weird to read, but I think that's because it's not very often that you see a story where the humans are essentially being hunted, and not in a kind of post-apocalyptic way. It was done in more of a, this is everyday nature to the whales. So that was done really well. The illustrations are beautiful. It's got a really interesting sketch style. I don't really know what I was expecting with the illustrations. I suppose I was going to say something similar to the Harry Potter illustrated books, and it is similar in the way that it is, it's got that hand-drawn look. The difference is they're quite dark. There's not a lot of colour, but I suppose that adds to the sense of, being in the depths of the ocean. So it was done really well. Another positive, it is a really short book. I know some people like big long books. I do as well, but I also quite like being able to pick up a short book, and especially with the illustrations. There are a lot of pages where obviously you do just flick through looking at the pictures essentially. So it was a really quick one to read. I read it in a day, and that was with, I think it was only 2 or 3 sittings of probably less than an hour each. So I'd say at most it took me 2.5 hours to get through, at very most probably more like 2 hours. So if you're looking for a quick read, a pretty read, it's definitely one I'd recommend. Now going into negatives. So as I mentioned, I'm a really big Patrick Ness fan, but I'm trying to look at this with my neutral hat on. And I have to say, the story, whilst it's interesting, isn't the best. It was interesting enough to make me want to read through the book in one go, but I think a lot of that was aided by the illustrations. And I think if this was a standalone novella or a standalone story on its own, with the current writing, I don't think it would be that popular. I don't think it's one that I would really enjoy. I know that, given that it's an illustrated book, given that it is a short book, Patrick Ness probably never intended for it to be a big, deep story, because it's hard to do that with something so small. And if it had been more of a 300-400 page book, that might be completely different, and I'm sure Patrick Ness would have been able to expand on it massively. But given that it was quite short, the story didn't necessarily jump out to me. As I said, it was interesting. It was interesting to see the world through the whales' perspective, and whilst the whale's a hunting man, they're also following on the trail for Toby Wick, which obviously is just a flip reverse of Moby Dick, and it's their version of. So it's interesting, it's unique, but at the same point, it kind of feels like there's just, I don't want to say it's a copy of Moby Dick, because obviously it's not, but there are so many similarities. Although obviously I haven't read Moby Dick, but everyone knows the story. There are so many similarities that whilst it was enjoyable, it wasn't unique enough to make me really, really fall in love with the story. If it wasn't for the illustrations, I probably would have given the book a lower score. Now, obviously I mentioned as one of my positives that we follow the whales and we follow Bathsheba. I'm using this as a positive and a negative. I found it interesting, and it was definitely a unique take on a story, because I don't think I've ever read a book where whales are the main characters before. But it made the story feel a little bit slow in places. Whales are really cool, but there's only so much I suppose you can do with whales in the ocean. You know, the descriptions are just about different parts of the oceans and different whales and fish life that they bump into, I suppose. And it would have been nice to have heard that expanded on more. The aquatic life wasn't touched on too much. I know that's kind of a really small negative, and I am just kind of clutching a little bit, but I'm trying to give you my honest thoughts on it. And just as I said, I think the main negative is just the fact that the story, whilst it was interesting, wasn't gripping. It's not one that I would scream and shout about. It's definitely a book I would recommend, but if you're a Patrick Ness fan, definitely pick it up. If you're a fan of illustrated editions, definitely pick it up. If you're a fan of Moby Dick, definitely pick it up, because it'd be interesting to hear thoughts of people that have read Moby Dick and compared. But if you're someone that doesn't like Patrick Ness's usual writing style, I'd say this probably isn't going to be one for you. Overall, I gave And the Ocean Was Our Sky 8 out of 10 or 4 out of 5 on Goodreads. But I'm going to caveat that with that's mainly because of the illustrations. If it wasn't for the illustrations, I think I would have probably given it a 3 out of 5 on Goodreads and a 6 out of 10, as that's how I like to do my scores, out of 10. Guys, I really hope you've enjoyed this review. Please let me know if you've read this book or you plan on picking it up soon. Apologies if my lighting is a little bit lower than normal. We are officially in the Great British winter, so natural light is quite hard to come by at the moment, but thank you for sticking through. Please remember to like, comment and subscribe if you've enjoyed this one, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye bye.